Hello and welcome back to this video. Today we're going to be discussing something a bit different from what I normally discuss on this channel. Today I'm going to be discussing, as you have seen in the title, what can we as Christians learn from Nietzsche? And this is not something which is just applicable to Christians, of course. It would also apply to anyone who's interested in Nietzsche as a whole and wants to learn more about this great philosopher and this great scholar. So essentially what I would like to do in this video is to talk about a few things that Christians can learn from Nietzsche. And this mainly revolves around the slave morality, the Übermensch, and also how we are to understand the death of God. And you know, Nietzsche, and I'll talk about this more in another video, but Nietzsche is one of the philosophers which is really misrepresented by popular philosophy, popular culture. And it's very easy for us to have misinformation and be deceived by this misinformation or these misrepresentation by these philosophers and these people who sometimes like to picture Nietzsche as this anti-Semite, this radical racist, or all these things and all these accusations against Nietzsche. It's very easy to see him as a scapegoat, but I think that is always a very dangerous thing to do. And to be honest, I've been subject to this misinterpretation myself before I started reading Nietzsche, and I just realized after reading him how deceived I was, and I think that's something that you have to keep in mind, and I'll definitely talk more about this in depth, the psychological aspect of it, and, well, why are we so deceived about Nietzsche? I'll talk more about that later, but today I would like to start off with just talking about, well, what does Nietzsche say about the slave morality? What does Nietzsche say about Christians? And what can we learn from it? Because if you watch this stream I did recently, I raised the idea that I was going to be doing I'm currently working on something called Zarathustra contra Alyosha, which is basically a script or a dialogue between two interlocutors, one who represents Nietzsche and one who represents Alyosha. And essentially what happens here in this shift is that, well, you have, or while I was writing it, was that originally I was writing with a friend, and my friend was going to be reading Nietzsche, and I was going to be reading Dostoyevsky, and that's why I like Dostoyevsky so much. But then something happened, and he had to do his own thing, so I decided, well, I'm going to just do Nietzsche as well. And reading Nietzsche really changed my worldview so much, and as I was writing both of these characters, arguing between them, it was developing my own philosophy, and it's something that I'll highly recommend you to do. And, well, I'm not saying that we should all just write a dialogue about everything we think about, but I think it is a very helpful thing for us to actually think through our arguments, to think through our views, and really, in our minds, play out a dialogue. What would you say, and what would your opposition say, and then how would you respond, and how would the opposition respond? And by just having this discussion, I realized that Nietzsche is right about a lot of things, and not only is that, but Nietzsche says a lot of things which are applicable to us Christians. Without further ado, or without further me talking about this random things, let me get into this video and let me start talking or showing you, well, what do I think that Christians can learn from Nietzsche? Well, I think the first thing that Christians can learn from Nietzsche is that we must separate ourselves from the rest of the people on this world. And this is a result, perhaps, of a growing pessimism in my philosophy, or a growing loss of hope in society. And I'm not saying that you should follow me in this sense of, well, society is really going downhill, but at the same time, I think there is significant truth to the idea that society has gone downhill, and that there has to be some separation between us and society. And this has nothing to, and I want to make it clear that this has nothing to do with the idea that we should stop evangelizing. That's definitely not the idea. But what I think Nietzsche tells us, and I think what is true, is that society is indeed a very fallen place, and that if we try to judge ourselves by society's standard, we're going to destroy ourselves, because not only is society promoting a completely different set of morals and a completely different worldview from what Christ is asking us to do, society has indeed turned towards being antagonistic towards Christianity, and has been turning against Christianity, turning against its roots. And you might say, well, that's not an active antagonism, and I do agree with that. I don't think Christianity is actively targeted in the sense that we hate Christianity kind of things. That's not what society is doing. But what I think society is doing is targeting all the things that Christianity stands for: Christian morals, Christian sexuality, Christian social hierarchy, Christian social structure, Christian ideas. And as a result of this, it's important that we have this distance, we have this separation, because in the past, I've always been very interlinked with society. I go on social media, I open it. I see a lot of my friends because as if you have known before, I live in a very leftist, uh, a leftist, atheistic, secular school. So a lot of the people I interact with on Instagram are all people with different views. And sometimes I look at it and it just hurts me a lot. It pains me to see society falling in a way it is. And they're not intentionally being bad. It's just the deceits that they're being told, the lies that they're being taken by, their views, their worldview, their antagonism against Christian beliefs. And looking at that, it really hits a nerve, if you got what I mean. It really makes you think about it. Can I really interact with this on a daily basis? And the answer that I quickly found, and supported by Nietzsche, is you can't. It's impossible for us to constantly live with this in our face. And yes, we have to live in society. We have to interact with society. But at the same time, there has to be this difference. We as Christians are set apart from the rest. We have to understand that we cannot fight every fight. We cannot try to mingle too much with society. We have, like Nietzsche, looking towards it, Übermensch, we have to separate ourselves. And you might say that I'm just interpreting my interpretation of Nietzsche or I'm imposing my views onto Nietzsche, but I don't think that's true. Because if you read Nietzsche, what Nietzsche says is that the road for the Übermensch is to separate ourselves from society first. Really, the we scholars in Beyond Good and Evil, we have to separate ourselves from society. We have to carry out, and this is a translation, but he calls what he so calls a self-vivisection. We have to cut deep into our hearts. We need to figure out our prejudices, our presuppositions, what we truly believe in. And when we have that laid out on the table, we examine it very powerfully. We look at it and say, what exactly is wrong here? What exactly is right here? Look at who we are and forge ourselves anew like a phoenix. A phoenix dies and is reborn stronger. Well, it depends on what type of phoenix or culture you're believing in. But most times you have a phoenix dying and being reborn stronger. That's what we have to do. What we should do, I think, following Nietzsche's advice, is to go into self-isolation for a while, or at least separation. Don't care too much about society. Separate yourself from society, and really ask yourselves, who are you? And that's the second point that I think Nietzsche raises very perfectly. Questioning your presuppositions and your interior intrinsic beliefs. That is very important for anyone, not just for Christians, but for absolutely anyone. We have to figure out who we are at our core. And this is an idea discussed by Dostoyevsky. And the reason for this, why do we have to figure out who we are at our core, is that sometimes when you figure out who you are at your core, it's going to scare you. And I'm not trying to make things up or make it sound way worse than it is, but it is true. Humans are at our core horrible people. And I don't think there's any softer way to say this to you, but I think it's very true that if you just cut out yourself and push yourself to the extreme, put yourself in the mind of Kirillov or Stavorkin or Ivan in Dostoyevsky's works, you put yourself in these different situations, you would soon realize that the monsters, these so-called devils, these so-called demons that you see in these works are very much alive in you. And as Christians, and as people in general, we have the responsibility for ourselves to be accountable for our deepest secrets and our deepest psychological states. And we have to delve deep into ourselves, like what Nietzsche says, carry out that self-vivisection and really figure out what we truly believe in. And I think that's a second important thing that we have to learn from Nietzsche, because it's very easy. And this is something that I write in my book. The link's going to be in the bio below to buy it. But to be honest, that's the least of my worries here. But what I'm saying is that we have to figure out whether we are truly a Christian or not. And it's very easy to say you're a Christian. I'm a Christian, I'm going to be saved. That is not it. Most people who are a Christian probably will not go to heaven. And when I mean most of the people who are a Christian, those people aren't truly Christians. They just say they're a Christian on Sunday, go to church, and even go to church in society these days is seen as something really good already. But they don't live the life. They don't try to focus on God and try to strive to improve to be God. And that doesn't mean that if you have a bit of a falling out in your relationship with God, if you're suddenly moved away a bit, overcome by temptation, that doesn't mean you've lost your salvation. What I mean is that if your heart is not in the right place and you're not constantly trying to say, well, I failed, but I'm going to improve. I failed, but I'm going to make myself better. I'm going to I'm going to rely on Christ and strengthen myself. If you don't do that, then there really is a significant problem with your life, and at least your Christian life, that is. And that's what Nietzsche tells us to do, is to really figure out what is at the heart of our lives, what is at the heart of our psychology, and figure out what that is and see what you can do. And there's something that says, he who fights the monster should be very careful lest he becomes one. You look into the abyss and you might see the abyss staring back at you. And that is so true. When I first started focusing on becoming a better Christian around a year ago, I've grown up as a Christian all my life, or in a family of a Christianity, or a Christian family all my life. I never committed myself to Christ. I said I was a Christian. I did everything that a good Christian child should do. But I was a dreadful Christian. I was absolutely a horrible Christian. And it was only a year ago where I really faced myself. I really delved deeper into myself after something quite bad happened in my life. Not bad in like, oh, you had almost died situation, not that, but something happened where I felt deep guilt. And through that guilt, I really delved deep into my heart. I delved deep into my beliefs and see what do I truly believe in. And what I saw was like Nietzsche predicted. I saw the abyss staring back at me. I tried to fight the monster, which was, if you see in my testimony, was of someone in the same class as mine, but who I didn't like. I tried to fight him, but it soon turned out that I was a monster. I stared into the abyss, delving deep into my heart, and I found what was reflecting back at me not a very good ideal. So that's essentially what I'm trying to say here. The second thing we learned is that we really have to focus on our prejudices, our presuppositions, and our intrinsic beliefs and see whether they are in the right place. So the final thing I think we can learn from Nietzsche, and this is definitely not exclusive this, you can learn more things from Nietzsche, that is for sure. But I think the third and final thing that I would like to talk about in this video is that we have to avoid a slave morality. And this is Nietzsche's idea of ressentiment, and it's quite an idea of it's quite similar to the idea of resentment, but he likes to use the French word, I think, it's sentiment or something like that. I don't have a French accent, whatever, but that is essentially the idea of resentment. We as resentment basically could be seen as the morality of the herd. It's the idea that you feel bad for the situation you are in. You pity yourself, and out of your self-pity, you have jealousy for those who are more successful than you. And from that jealousy against those people, then you try to overturn them. You override them, try to get rid of them. And that's what we see in socialism, right? I mean, they say equality all the time, but to be honest, it's just basically them saying, we're jealous of your power, let's get rid of you and make ourselves God. So, and I'll discuss that more in another video, and that's not today's discussion, but we have to really figure out whether we are acting out of resentment or are we acting out of love. And that's something that I try to end off my dialogue with. It's called the will to power contra the will to good. Are we acting out of this hatred towards other people? Are we acting towards a hatred when we're trying to improve ourselves? Or are we actually trying to truly improve ourselves? And when I mean truly improve ourselves, are we trying to act as a better Christian? Are we trying to improve our lives? And of course, Nietzsche doesn't believe we should become a better Christian. He thinks that Christianity is the slave morality. But I have my arguments against it, and I'll discuss that in a later video. But essentially, what I think Nietzsche says is very right here. It's very easy for people, especially as the victims, to have resentment and try to attack or get rid of those who are greater than them. And that's not getting rid of the oppressors, but getting rid of anything above them. But as Christians, we cannot do that. Our job is to improve ourselves and live life as we can and make the most of what we got. And this is essentially what Tolkien says when he says, when Frodo asks Gandalf, and he says, well, I wish these things never happened. And then Gandalf turns back to Frodo and says, well, and so do I. But and so does everyone who has lived to see these times. But all we can do is to do what is best with the time that is given to us. And that is essentially what we have to do. We have to make the most of the present. We have to improve ourselves. Separate ourselves from society when society is too far lost. Do not let yourselves be dragged down by society. Let yourselves be elevated in your relationship with Christ. Do not focus on the other people. Do not focus on the monster. Do not focus too much on fighting the monster, because you might look around, fight the monster, and turn around and figure out that you have become one. And finally, one last thing. Sorry, I got interrupted there for a bit of moment, so I had to stop the stream and continue recording. So finally, the last tip and most important thing that we can learn from Nietzsche is that we should not act out of resentment. We should not act out of hatred or jealousy towards any other group that is oppressing us. We should act for ourselves but what I mean by acting for ourselves is that we should act for Christ and work for that relationship with Christ, and that should be our goal. Not out of our hatred for anyone else, not for our seemingly oppression from anyone else. Do not focus on these opposition groups. Do not act out of hatred to suppress them, to take revenge. Act out of love. Act out of that will to good that is the fundamental driving force of the universe. And I will argue for that in another video. But essentially, I think these are the 3 things that we can learn from Nietzsche. And I would really hope that you bear it in mind and keep it to heart. You might not, and of course, Nietzsche doesn't think that Christianity is all great of a thing. But his concepts, his ideas that he discusses in his books are very applicable. And I think that we can apply those ideas to Christianity, as I've done in this video, and strengthen our faith to Christ. So these are the 3 things that we can learn from Nietzsche as Christians and as people as a whole. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. As you can see, this would take up my Saturday Dostoyevsky video, and the reason for that is because I've decided to go into a bit of an isolation this Saturday. I'm going to cut myself off from society. I'm going to sit down in a room. I've booked a room in this club of mine. I'm going to sit down and write, because I have quite a lot of stuff to write. So I'm going to sit down, lock myself up in a room and write for 2 days. So that's kind of the plan for what I'm doing. So I don't expect to hear any videos from me on Saturday or Sunday. I also probably wouldn't make a video tomorrow. I'll make more of an admin video next week, but that's basically it. Also on Monday, I'm going on John Dunphy's channel to talk about Christianity for All, so you could look forward for that, JMD Apologetics 101, I think. So if you're interested in that, make sure you go check it out. If you're interested in more content about Dostoyevsky, Nietzsche, and also Christian philosophy as a whole, make sure you like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Help this channel grow. If you want to ask me any questions or develop anything with me, make sure you go check out my Discord server, where there is a bracket, or there is a space for you to discuss almost everything from philosophy of religion to literature. Everything's there. And if you don't have a section that you are interested in, just let me know in the feedback section on the Discord server. That would help a lot. So without further ado, like always, stay safe. God bless. I wish you all the best in the upcoming weeks. Until I see you next time, stay safe, God bless, and goodbye. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.